Have you ever thought about your birds getting the flu? Well, today we're going to be talking about influenza in birds, so stay tuned. Hello everyone, welcome to Farming in Ohio. Dwayne Rigsby, Chris Bruynis here. Today we're going to be talking about influenza in birds. And Chris, tell us just a little bit about what this influenza is.
Well, you know, it's not a new thing. We had an outbreak in the winter of 2014-15. Many of you that exhibit birds at the county fair through 4-H or FFA, all of those shows were canceled because we didn't want to spread that flu around. And so avian influenza isn't a new thing, but we've detected it again here in 2022. There's been 297 cases of avian influenza detected in wild birds, mostly ducks, mostly waterfowl, and then that's really coming from our hunters that are out there hunting, and they catch they shoot a duck and they say, this duck doesn't look right, and so they'll turn it in and they'll run tests on it, and then we can detect this flu. And so, you know, a flu in ducks or in poultry, very similar to flu in people. I mean, we have similar symptoms, and I'll get to that in a little bit, but you know, since it's in wild birds and they migrate, and we know that there's a migratory routes of birds, and as they migrate they sometimes come in contact with our domesticated birds. And so far in 2022 we've had a little over 1.6 million poultry that either have died from the flu or have been euthanized to prevent the spread of the flu, of avian influenza, to other birds. And you know, you start thinking about that, is this only the large farms where we have large populations? Well, one of them was 1.2 million birds in the state of Delaware in one facility, but there's been flocks as small as 2 birds that have caught it. So I mean, even if, and you know, my goal today is to really talk to those homeowners that may have a small flock. We're keeping birds to produce eggs for ourselves, and so that's really what I'm targeting today, to think about how do we prevent them from getting the flu.
Okay. Now, I was going to say, do we have some symptoms?
We do. Actually, in birds, all kinds of poultry, it's very similar. They might just suddenly die without any visible symptoms. So, you know, if you walk out one morning and you have a dead bird, we need to have that checked. Lack of energy, appetite, lack of coordination if they don't quite walk right, purple discoloration or swelling of varied body parts, diarrhea. Probably the most common one that we think about associated with the flu is that nasal discharge, coughing, sneezing, all of those things. But in poultry, we can also see, if we have egg-laying poultry, reduction in production. We're going to lay less eggs, or the eggs are going to be abnormal. And so, you know, they don't necessarily have all of these signs, but they will have some of those. And so since flu, and we've learned this through coronavirus, right, can be spread in multiple ways, and the bird flu, we can host that. Now, we'll have similar symptoms, and that's my next slide. We'll have similar symptoms as our normal flu, not necessarily the avian influenza, but we can then give it to the birds. So, you know, here's what we talk about with our youth that are exhibiting animals at the fair, and it doesn't matter what animal. You know, if I'm over at my friend's house and I'm out in the barn with their animals and they happen to have the flu, but we don't know it yet, we can take that home to ours real easily. And so we start talking then about biosecurity and what that means for our animals. And so if we would happen to get the bird flu in people, there is symptoms. And again, same symptoms that we have for most all of our flus that we get: fever, cough, sore throat, muscle aches, you know, abdominal pain, vomiting, eye infections, difficulty breathing, and it can go as far as pneumonia and severe respiratory diseases. But then it might depend on which strain. There are multiple strains of all viruses or all flus.
Right.
We learned that with COVID. Not only did we have the first one, but then there was multiple strains found. Some of them affected humans, and some of them did not, right?
Right.
And so I think if we think about the same thing, humans live in a world of viruses. And so not only do they affect all living things and some things that are non-living, but we regularly eat, breathe billions of viruses. Some of them affect us, some of them don't.
Right.
And what they have found is they look back in history, and some of the older viruses that are out there, they now can find them intertwined with our DNA. And some of them make us stronger and resistant to new viruses, and some of them would have a negative effect. We really don't know, but they have found some of the old viruses. You go back to the 1918 Spanish flu. They can now detect some of that DNA and RNA from those viruses in some of our populations. And so, we know they're out there. They're not necessarily all nasty, bad things. They just exist, but they're not alive. It's not a living organism. It's not like bacteria or anything else, amoeba. They're not living. They do not think. And I think it was interesting. I got a couple of these slides from Scott Henney, who's a virologist in our Department of Vet Medicine at Ohio State. And I was talking to him one day, and he said, it's really interesting. He said, viruses do not think. He said they're really, really good at replicating themselves in terms of creating a lot of replications, but they're not so good at the replication process. And so even though they're replicating themselves, that next one that becomes replicated may not exactly look like the parent, if you will.
Okay.
And that's why we have different strains of viruses. And so it said it's not like a virus thinks about, if I make this change, then I can become more infectious. If it becomes more infectious, it's just pure luck.
Yeah.
And if it becomes less infectious, it's just pure luck. So there's no, they don't think.
Right.
But they replicate really, really well.
Yeah.
But they're efficient at making more of themselves, but they're inefficient at making it exactly the same. And so I think that's something to think about. As we think about it, hey, they attack susceptible cells and organs in all kinds of hosts, and again, our immune system kicks in. And if we can defeat the virus, then we have antibodies or we have natural resistance to it again, life goes on. If we can't, and again, go back to humans and coronavirus, if we can't, then, ultimately, some people have died because of it. And so, I just think bird flu is yet another virus, and it will behave very similarly to what we're used to, and we've all had this wonderful lesson in viruses. But now let's get back to our poultry. So we get one infected. Maybe there was a bird that flew in and ate some feed, left some mucus, whatever. Next bird got it. That virus goes in the bird, then it replicates itself, and then it comes out of the bird mostly through the respiratory system. And again, other birds, if we have them all together, they're going to get it, right? Will they all get it to the same level? No, just like we all didn't get coronavirus to the same level. Okay, so again, what we want to prevent, and when we start talking about biosecurity, what we want to prevent is that first contact of that first bird to the virus. Because if it never starts, and like we social distance, and I hated the word social distancing, physical distancing would have been a better definition of that. And so just like we try to stay away from each other to stop the spread of COVID, the same principle is for bird flu, and trying to prevent the spread of bird flu is to prevent our birds from being in contact with any other bird or person carrying that virus.
Okay.
And so when we go and we start thinking about basics of biosecurity, we really want to prioritize and protect the health of the backyard flock. And so how do I prevent other birds from coming in contact with my chickens?
It's a good, well, I guess it's a good question unless you keep them pinned in constantly.
Well, penning them in is one. If we're seeing any kind of waterfowl, if my home site or my farm happens to have a lake, do the chickens have access to the water? We probably want to pen them away from that. And so again, typically this is just during this migratory period that we're worried about spread. And so, by the end of June, that threat basically is gone. That's historically what has happened.
Okay.
And so, we're here January through late May, early June is kind of the time we want to think about how do we keep our chickens, our poultry on our property from interacting with other birds. And again, penning them in, netting, again, small enough netting that, it's not just waterfowl, but all birds can carry this. And so how do we do that? And so we're going to develop a plan. And each property is probably going to be a little bit different because our properties are different, our pens are different. And then we'll talk a little bit about what do we do if we have a problem. But prevention really is the key. We really, really want to prevent that virus from getting started in our flock because, ODA here in Ohio, but across the country, USDA is very serious about preventing the disease. I mean, it is a very debilitating virus if we get in these flocks. So if it's detected, and it's detected in one bird, and I've got 1.2 million birds, they're all going down.
They're going,
And so, not only are we protecting, you can say, well, I've only got 5 birds, I'll go buy new ones, I'm not real worried about it. Well, but, if you get a bird that's infected, it gives it to another bird that's now flying over to the neighbors, and they have a large flock. And, when we start thinking about, in 2014-15, so that January through June in 15, there was, and I don't want to quote the number wrong, but it was more than 10% of our birds nationwide were euthanized. And so if you think about it, well, it raises cost of food.
Oh yeah.
And so
absolutely.
And so it's not just me. It's not just my 5 birds. It is protecting the industry.
Yeah. And that's why I guess you would say the industry in these big egg-laying facilities, they're all enclosed. They don't let them outside. So that really protects some of that from it.
But yet this virus is getting in
there somehow.
And that could be human.
Could be human, right?
Could be the workers that brought it in.
Yeah.
But I mean, we haven't been able to trace or track how it got into all these facilities. Again, divergence here. Most of our swine facilities have been practicing biosecurity for a long time. And I had a good friend of mine that had 600 sows, farrow to finish. And to go into his barn, you had to pass through a shower facility. And on the other side of the shower, they supplied you with all clothing, shoes, boots, socks, underwear, and you didn't go in that barn otherwise. Even their workers went through that shower.
Every day.
Every day. And then on the way out, you went through the shower, not because you needed to get rid of any viruses you might have picked up in the barn. You just didn't want to smell like pigs.
Right. Yeah. And I'm sure if they had to, do that if they had to leave the barn during the day, they had to go right back through it again.
They absolutely.
And the clothes that they wore in there, they probably had to get rid of and put in new, right?
Yeah, the clothes stay there. There's a washer and dryer facility inside in the barn.
Okay.
And so I think we're going to start seeing more of that even in our poultry, any kind of a large livestock facility, just to protect.
Makes sense.
I don't think that our poultry houses have gone there yet, but this is serious enough. I wouldn't be surprised to see some modification happening.
Right.
And so again, even for us, we talked about that youth that might have been at their friend's house in the barn with their animals. Before they go to their own barn, they really ought to go in, change clothes, shower, put those clothes in the laundry, and wear a fresh set of clothes out to the barn.
Right.
And so, I mean, that goes even for the backyard flock. I've been to work. I probably should not go straight to the barn.
Right.
Depending on our job, we may not have clothes we want to wear to the barn. But if we have the luxury of working in blue jeans and we're out and about, we really need to come back and think about changing those clothes.
Right.
And so, we think about direct versus indirect. We just talk bird to bird is really how it gets started, but once it's in a region, indirect something else to our bird, and that something else could really be us.
Yeah.
And I just think we need to reemphasize that. And so we talked about the wild birds, and again, waterfowl, the migratory birds is really where it starts, but then the non-migratory birds can pick that up as well. And so, you know, the blue jays and the cardinals that we see at our feeders right now, if they get infected and they fly into our pen where our chickens are and eat some of their corn that we've put out for them to eat, they could be sharing that virus at that point.
Right.
And so, you know, we really need to think about, you know, where do we feed our birds? Can other birds get access to that feed? You know, a lot of us like to go out and interact with our birds, and it's therapeutic.
Absolutely.
But again, we need to think, and again, it's just these winter months. I mean, we're really in the thick of it. Our first detections were in January this year in the United States. And so as those migratory birds start moving, we know it's out there in nature.
It's out there right then.
And are they going to? And there are certain migratory birds that will have the virus that don't show the symptoms and are not affected by it, but they can still carry it.
They can still pass it on.
Absolutely.
They can be carriers.
And so, you know, we start looking at some of these major North American migratory flyways, you know, and if we look through the center of the United States, it's just a little bit west of Ohio is some of those major migratory routes. And right now, we've seen bird flu this winter in Kentucky, Indiana, and Michigan. So all around us. And then New York and Delaware on the eastern side. But Ohio and Pennsylvania, not yet. But
how have we missed that?
Well, they don't fly over us.
Yeah, somehow they're like dodging us.
Well, they don't fly over us in their typical migratory routes. But now once they're here, well, they start flying back, non-migratory, just movement.
Right.
And so, you know, we think it'll come here. And so it's really a concern right now.
Yeah.
And so the direct, we've talked about this, you know, really, how are we housing the birds? Where are they getting their water from? Who has access to that water? Where's the food being fed? Where's the food being stored? And so we really want to start thinking about that and looking at our property and how do we minimize, I'm not sure we can eliminate, but how do we minimize interaction of our backyard flock, of our poultry, with any kind of other birds that might be coming onto the property? And so something I think that's, but then secondly, if we're buying birds, are we buying them from a reputable source?
Right.
You know, a lot of these, and the poultry industry is interesting. There are people out there that like to collect multiple breeds and the fancy poultry, and there are poultry swaps, and that is a really good time to swap this virus between a lot of people and a lot of poultry. And so, you know, this time of year, I think I would avoid that if I'm serious about trying to stop the spread of this. And so where are you getting your birds? Are they coming to you, you know, as a chick? Are they coming to you as an adult? You'll see on Facebook, you'll see on some of the other marketplace type websites, people that are trying to, for whatever reason, get rid of their birds, and you don't know what you're getting.
Right.
And
they
so,
can be,
you know, I would really, if you're serious about this, think about not taking adult birds back to your property. If you do, where are you going to house them differently? So if they happen to be ill or have a virus, that they don't automatically give that to the rest of your birds.
So kind of have them in a quarantine area for a little while.
Have them in a quarantine area for a little while. Yeah, absolutely. Keep them separate, separate feed. And then again, let's start thinking about it. If I go in and I feed those, we ought to feed them last because we've dealt with our known flock first, and we know they're not diseased. We do them last, and then we can take those clothes, launder them. And so, you know, we don't want to go first to the new birds. That would be the natural thing to do. I got some new animals. I want to go see how they're doing. So I'm going to run out to the barn and check on them first, and then I'll go take care of the rest of the chores. And that was just absolutely the wrong way to do that. Because we want to put them in that quarantine area and then deal with them last in case there is any disease. We've not spread that unintentionally to the rest of the herd.
Makes sense.
And so, we think about this, the biosecurity of the brooder, start with healthy chicks, start with a clean, sterilized facility. Every year if we empty that out, let's say we're raising some chicks and we're going to raise them up for meat for our freezer. Again, they can get sick. It's not just egg layers. And so again, how are we cleaning the facility that they're going to come in terms of making sure that it's clear of viruses? And so, a nice chlorine spray in between filling that up is good. And so there are ways to do that. And then we want to work with the youngest birds first. We were just talking about quarantine last, but if I have multiple ages, younger birds are less likely to be affected by the virus. And so we want to go from the younger birds on up to the older birds in our facility. Now, most of our backyard flocks, they're all in one pen, right?
Right.
And so that's usually not possible. But if we do have them separated by age, or we want to start with the youngest ones first, and then we want to think about if we have multiple pens, how are we sterilizing our person in between? We're out in the pen, we're going to step on some poultry waste, some manure.
Yeah.
What are we doing for our shoes before we walk into the next one?
pen, yeah.
And so again, the sterilization plan is important. And so that indirect, where can we pick it up? Well, what I didn't see on here is if I'm an avid hunter and I have a poultry flock at home and I've been out duck hunting,
Yeah.
I might have just brought it home.
You might have brought it home from where you were standing. Yeah.
Visitors to our properties, us visiting other properties is probably number one.
Yeah.
We're going to get into the fair season. There are some fairs in June, which
Starting
is still
real quick,
in that window of concern. Whether we're buying new animals into the herd, even used equipment, how is it being cleaned and sterilized in between? I've had poultry before. I don't currently, where I live doesn't do it. But when I left my previous small farm, the poultry equipment, I gave it to friends and neighbors, and how did they clean that in? I didn't clean it before I gave it to them.
Maybe they didn't. Maybe they just used a little garden hose and hosed it off and threw it in.
Who knows? And so
you don't know that.
Think about that. Where we're storing our feed, where we're getting our water. On larger operations, we're even concerned about delivery trucks, delivery drivers. This delivery truck has been at the last farm, and now they pull into your farm. What do they bring with it?
Right.
And so, all of those things are starting to become more and more of a concern. So let's think about some of this, just our backyard, personal home security. We need a plan. Clorox is good. There's a picture there up on the screen of a little mat, and you can put some, and I forget the name of the sanitizing that you step on. And that'll kill all of the viruses and bacteria. Whether you
just on the bottom of your shoes.
On the bottom of your shoes, absolutely. And so we can then do that and then enter. And so, but think about how do we control the flow of visitors. A lot of us, if we have children, they bring their friends over. Just think about that a little bit. And again, quarantine area. We get a sick bird, unfortunately, with this virus. It's going to take out the whole herd, not because they'll all get sick, but trying to stop the spread. USDA will euthanize the entire flock. I said herd, flock for birds.
Flock for birds,
And so I think we got to be careful there. And then the other thing, if we noticed anything this time of year, especially any kind of a flu symptom we talked about earlier in our flock, we want to get a hold of our local veterinarian. They are a wealth of information. They can even help us think about what that biosecurity protocol might be. But they're going to help with vaccinations. There isn't a vaccine, to my knowledge, against this flu. And so, will there be? Well, the problem with this virus, the same as we have with coronavirus, it changes. It's not exactly identical every time.
It's not the same strain.
And so the strain that's now coming up isn't quite as virulent as the one from 2014-15, but it's still, we're not going to take any chances. We don't think the recovery rate is good, so that's you know, we're going to minimize the risk by euthanizing infected flocks.
So even if they do find it, Chris, in say your little backyard farm,
right?
You know, 10 birds.
10 birds, two birds.
Yeah. Are they gonna euthanize the entire thing?
Absolutely.
They'll come in and do that.
Absolutely.
So the vet has a responsibility to report it to the government. Is that how that works, or does the vet just say, nope, I've got to euthanize these birds?
No, I think it needs to be reported.
It's reported.
It's reported, yeah.
Okay.
And actually,
that's what I thought.
The owner should. I mean, on our larger farms, the owner will, even though they know what the outcome is. But the owner is still saying, you know what? Even though it's going to be a financial loss to me, I want to do this to protect the overall poultry industry here in the United States. And so, you know, and I guess that's why I wanted to record this today. Is, you know, we have so many people that keep poultry anymore. I mean, it is kind of amazing the number of people, and that's increased in the last 20 years. It really has, and coronavirus actually increased it more. Because we started to think about food security, and you know, if I go to the grocery store, there was lots of times shelves were half empty, and that's concerning. You know, I want to eat. I like eating,
absolutely.
by the way. And so that's a little concerning. And so a lot of people have started to think about becoming food sufficient. Raising more fruits and vegetables, especially a vegetable garden.
Kind of being your backyard gardener.
Keeping some animals, so you know I can either have the eggs, and when they're done laying eggs, it becomes stock for chicken soup. I mean, we're going to use these animals, and so but we need to know what's normal, what's abnormal, and so to me, anytime we're out in our flock and we see something not quite right, I know that it's probably $100 bill to call the vet. But we really should do that. And so not just say, well, you know, the value of my birds is probably less than $100. And so you know, it's an economic loss to me, regardless of how we do it. But just to protect the whole food industry, we need to be thinking about that. We need to be thinking about that. The United States Department of Agriculture, there is a nice booklet, and I think you could probably snag this online. The address is there on the bottom of the screen. And it's 6 ways to prevent poultry diseases. We've talked about most of them, but just kind of as a recap for this. We'll get right away to the 6 here. You know, that physical distancing, we're also familiar with that because of coronavirus. The same thing with poultry. You know, how are we keeping the other birds away from them? Keep the facilities clean is number 2. You know, don't bring it home with you. So again, changing your clothes before you go out to the barn. You know, not letting the friends come over and just run in there. You know, how are we not bringing it home with us? And then we'll go to the next 3 here. We don't want to borrow it from a neighbor. And again, borrowing equipment or even getting new birds from a bird swap, and they're popular. Again, we just need to be careful about that. And then know the warning signs of an infectious disease and take appropriate action. And then if we have sick birds, we want to report them. And again, you can call USDA Veterinary Services, or you can call your local vet, and they'll know what to do.
Great. Well, Chris, we're out of time. I know that
out of slides.
You're out of slides. Worked well, didn't it?
Yes.
Well, if anybody's got any questions, the address for Chris is right there on the screen, and I can't emphasize enough. You know, make sure you watch your flock, pay attention to them, get used to what they look like, how they act, and things like that. So, Chris, until another great show. We will see everybody next time on Farming in Ohio.